Okay, kind of an old-fashioned topic, but something that we all do every day, editing. And I called it editing that empowers, how editing raises the bar and helps writers to grow. Okay, so I had some other titles that didn't make the editing list. They were cut by an editor, but that was just for this week. It was put in the UX, in the UXodus, the 10 plagues of placeholder text, how not to pass over your users, editing the Easter Bunny way, and Ramadan and writers, no feedback, please, I'm fasting. But as you know, my editors always cut things out. So, and I self-edited. So we'll start with a quote, a very famous quote from Ernest Hemingway. The only kind of writing is rewriting. So, he's talking about fiction a long time ago, 70 years ago, Nobel Prize winning author. However, it still applies today to UX writing. As writers, we very rarely get it right on the first attempt, on the first version. And so it's kind of the unwritten rule of all writers is that we always have to rewrite. And that's where editing comes in. So who am I? Quick little intro to me. I've been writing professionally for 18 years, 12 years in high tech, 5 years as a UX writer, and I'm also a team lead at Wix. We've got a very big team of UX writers at Wix, the website builder. I've contributed to 3 Lonely Planet guidebooks. I have 3 children, all girls, and I have 2 passports. So one Israeli, one British, and I did all this in 30 years. So what will we cover today? Okay, we're going to cover what is editing. It seems like quite a simple question, but it's not a concrete answer actually. Why do we edit? Different ways of editing. I'm going to give some tips and techniques of how we edit at Wix. And the desired outcome of editing. And I think it's important to say that even if you're not an editor, this presentation is also good for self-editing. It might apply to you even if you don't edit other people and just edit yourself. Okay, but first up, before I get into that, I want to go back with a brief history of editing. So, it's not a new thing. We've been editing for a very long time, ancient texts of the Bhagavad Gita, or the Bible, I was like the Bible written by God, edited by Moses, and to the first newspapers. I always thought that newspapers came from the UK, but I actually found out through my Google research that they came from the Netherlands in the 17th century. And then up until the 1920s, where it really became a newspaper, became an industry and editors. And if you see there on the right, we have the proofreading marks, which even when I started as a journalist 20 so years ago, I was still learning these proofreading marks, and it's still there in the brain. Until today, where we have a lot of user-generated content and AI content. Talk about AI in a bit. Sometimes we wish there were proofreaders and fact-checkers and sub-editors, editors. Donald Trump is a classic example. It looks to me that Bernie people will fight, if not their blood, sweat, and tears was a total waste of time. There's a lot of stuff out there that's not edited. What is editing? Okay, and quickly, I don't know if I have enough time. I quickly want to ask you guys just to put in the chat maybe what do you think editing is? What is editing? And if everyone wants to have a go at just writing a few words what they think it is in the chat, and I'll have a look. Adding magic, rephrasing. All editing is rewriting. Unfluffing. Oh, unfluffing, I like that one. Polishing. Buffing. Okay, applying rules. Yeah. Okay, making sure that content is correct. Fantastic. Okay, cool. Improving, crying. Okay, cool. Okay, so I can't read them all now, but revisiting, rethinking, rewriting, giving a new perspective. So this is what I found online. So editing actually for the Oxford English Dictionary says to prepare a piece of writing to be published by correcting the mistakes, making improvements, etc. Someone said improving. No one said preparing, I think. And the Merriam-Webster dictionary says to alter, adapt, or refine, especially to bring about conformity to a standard or to suit a particular purpose. So what I noticed here was that none of them use the word cut. And often that's the preconception of editing, is that it's cutting. or reducing, although refining is type, but it's actually preparing. When we talk about UX writing and editing for UX, is actually for users, right? It's like UX writers, that's what we do. We put the users in the forefront. And here's a classic example from Dropbox, where our main goal as an editor, as UX writer, is actually just to simplify complex messages. The messages that we get from the UX designers or the product managers, or they involve sometimes legal. Here's a great example of how they simplified it into a very simple question, and the CTA reduced a paragraph of content, and nothing was lost. However, editing is more than words. Sometimes it's the format of the screen, it's the layout, it's the design. And so here we have a delete modal, a delete pop-up from a dialogue from Wix. And we're deleting contacts, and before we edited it, we kind of saw the bullet points on the left, and we thought maybe it's a bit too much for a note, so we decided to lose the bullet points and make it into a note. And obviously the font could be smaller, maybe sometimes you want to add bullet points, sometimes you want to add CTAs, sometimes you want to add subtitles. So this can sometimes come in editing, where we're literally changing the design, as the previous speaker said. And editing isn't only cutting text. Here's an example in a very dev-orientated product in a dev center of Wix, where we have an automation, and you can create a pre-installed automation. And it was written when we were editing it, we saw this this line here about get an automation link, and we kind of realized, oh, actually that's a whole step in itself. That requires a whole step before you get an automation. You have to create an automation. So we put it as a step, and we created more text, a lot of text. So sometimes it's adding text. Editing isn't top down. It's not like an old-fashioned newspaper where an editor fixes the writer's text. We see it more as a collaboration. I mean, I always think of the old Superman Daily Planet newspaper, but today it's more, editor is more like a friendly conversation. It ain't Grammarly. It's more than improving the English, the word choice, the typos, the grammar, and I always say that when you're editing the text, you're also editing the product. However, there's a caveat there. Typos do matter, and if you do find a typo when you're editing your own copy or someone else's copy, obviously we need to point it out and take it out. And sometimes even AI can't do that. So we had one on a product we had called automations, where we had set up your trigger instead of set up your trigger. And although I love Winnie the Pooh, I didn't think it could go out to millions of users. So why do we edit? Why do we edit at Wix? Okay, so number one is keeping a consistent voice, tone, and style. We have over 60 UX writers. It's becoming hard to be consistent. Ensuring quality for over 200 million users. Again, if we had a readership, if it was a newspaper or a magazine, like the New York Times, and it had 200 million readers, it would be strange if nobody had a look at it before it went out, before it was published. So we go by the same standards. Raising the bar and improving content optimizes the whole product, the whole flow. But the editing process has a second side. It also helps us improve and grow as writers. It teaches and supports with feedback. It's all about feedback, really, for the writer. And it gives writers tools to become independent. So new writers, or writers that are not so experienced, with editing sessions, they become more independent. And as I say, everybody needs a second pair of eyes and someone to bounce ideas off. Even if you've been writing for 20 years, I really enjoy having someone else look at my work. Who can edit? Okay, so you need to kind of develop an eye for editing. It's not something that you could just do overnight. You kind of need to suffer first before you can be an editor. You need to be, so when I started as a writer, someone told me, my editorial director told me, like, before you can edit, you need to write, and a lot. It's just something that comes with time and just looking at a lot of content, and UX or wherever you're editing. And a good editor catches things that others don't. So it's almost like you read the screen in a different way. It might have been gone through 20 people, demos, product reviews. Sometimes the editor is the person who just goes, like, I read it in a different way, and you're using the wrong language there, or something's very strange there, or we've never done this before. Maybe that it's good. Sometimes that could be a good thing. And this comes with time and practice. Ways of editing. Okay. So these are the different ways that we edit at Wix. I think it's quite unique. I would be interested if you put in the chat if you guys also have one-to-one editing, but I think it's not really the done thing anymore. However, we think it's the most effective way of editing is a one-to-one session with a mentor or a team leader, another writer. And working and reworking a piece of text is a great way to dive deep into the product and look at it from different angles. And it's something that I'll talk about in a minute, actually, why we prefer it. There's also one-to-one peer editing. This is very useful. As I said, we have a big team of UX writers. If you just want to exchange quickly ideas, this can be done face-to-face. If you're in the office, what do you think of this screen? Or, on Slack. And this is a great way just to get some quick feedback and from your peers, from other UX writers. And then I think this is very common nowadays, like the group show and tells or the flash sessions, where writers can show a few screens from a Figma or a prototype or wireframe tool and get some invaluable outside feedback. And then we also have product reviews, higher level product reviews, and we also have a Writers Guild at Wix. So guild reviews where management or will look at product from beginning to end. It also includes KPIs, competitor research, user voice, and often content comes up as the main issue in these product reviews. Why is one-to-one most effective? This is my opinion, by the way, this is not the Bible. I think that, imagine my daughter's learning piano. Imagine if she was learning piano and she had 5 different piano teachers. It'd be chaos, right? So I find the best way to learn a craft, and writing is a craft, is by one-to-one coaching. And group feedback and show and tells have their place, and they're fantastic. But meaningful training, long-term growth, I think requires a deeper focus. And then we get into the area of mentorship. Really editing, I would say 50% of it is the words, and the other 50% when you're a UX writer, as we know, are how to work with the team, how to integrate with the team, how to work with the UX designer or that product manager. And this is where everybody needs a mentor. And I've got a picture here of Michael Stipe and Tom York from Radiohead, Michael Stipe from REM. I was listening to a podcast recently, and I heard that Tom York had a very hard time in the mid-90s after writing Creep to come up with a new hit single, and he wanted to get away from it. And before he wrote OK Computer and the classic album, and Michael Stipe became his mentor. He's someone who'd been there 15 years before and was able. So the point is that everybody needs a mentor, even rock stars. I'm going to give you a few tips and techniques. So editing tips and techniques. Number one is really to discuss and bounce ideas, which is why I've got the picture of ping pong balls. It's a two-way conversation. Editor can suggest edits and cut or ideas, but the writer can counter them, because the writer probably knows more the product better than the editor does. And usually the best versions I find come after a back and forth, like a ping pong. Use leading questions. So it's very tempting when you're editing to just rewrite the copy for them. Let me rewrite it. You should write it like this. But after, the best way is just to ask leading questions. What do we mean by leading questions? I'm very good at asking dumb questions and playing the dumb user. So, these are some examples. How did the user get to the screen? Where did they go after? How did you do your research? What did competitors say? Does this align with the goal? What's our KPI? How is this going to be measured? Often overlooked. Is there a benefit here for the user we need to talk about? Did you sync with the UX designer on this? Sometimes that hasn't happened, or sometimes that's about to happen. Could this be dynamic content? Do we have any limitations? Can we switch that sentence around? Why are we front loading that? And is there a simpler way to say this? Could it be shorter? Classic. Another one is like not looking at the screen, not always looking at the screen. Sometimes I find as writers, we can be overly influenced by the placeholder copy or the dummy copy that the UX designer or the current product has, and it can sometimes send us in the wrong direction. So sometimes it's just better just to not look at the screen for a minute and look at me and say to the writer, look me in the eye and tell me what you're trying to say here. What does this product do? I had it recently with a product called team management. And I said to the writer, like, what are you trying to say here? And they kind of said, oh, this is where you add people to work on your site. And I was like, we haven't used any of those words in the copy, so let's use them. And this helps us to be more conversational. Obviously refer to the style guide. I'm not going to go into this too much, but having the right in editing, if a writer is not can sometimes be reminded of the capitalization and the terminology. We could do a whole session on terminology, right? And I think there is a session on that tomorrow. And referring to the do's and don'ts, the content patterns and the style guide. And also when we're editing, it's a great opportunity to look out for that legacy content, that design depth. The writer may be focused on this, this right-hand side, this new feature here. However, it's a great opportunity to look at the context, like there's other stuff on the screen, or we haven't done this for a while, or this copy is 5 years old, because that's how the user sees the screen. They don't just see the new section, they see the whole thing. So it's a great way to fix some old design depth that maybe not come up in anywhere else. The editor sometimes is the only person who's going to say, let's fix that copy that was written 5 years ago or 3 years ago. I want to talk a little bit about non-verbal and verbal editing. So when to write your edits and when to say it out loud. When I mean non-verbal editing, normally comments. So add in comments to a Figma or Google Docs, whatever you use. It's a great way to give in context feedback. It's right there on the screen. However, it does come with it's not always the best way to go. So, because sometimes we need to ask who else can see this, a Figma document, a Figma file. So it's obviously shared with other members of the team. You need to be careful what you say. Comments can be, you don't want to undermine the writer. Comments can be misunderstood. It's a very short, concise way, but sometimes they can just be missed. And I think the best, the last thing a writer wants to see is that there's 30 new comments from so-and-so. That's the last thing you want to see. So I think the key is not to overload with too many comments. It's a great way to be in context, but if you have you can have a quick zoom with them, it's a great way to point out lots of stuff, and also high level fixes. Here's some examples of less constructive comments and constructive comments that it's really easy to do the less constructive, and I have also been guilty of them, just going through like, this is repetitive, less constructive, this is repetitive, you've used this word your 4 times, can we maybe try a different word here, or like this UX sucks, or this product sucks, the hierarchy seems off, maybe I suggest you mock up a different layout with your designer, or remove this, or like cut this, we should cut this on. I'm not sure we need this part here. Can we try a version without it? And comments can also have another benefit where, we have a UX writer here who used it, did a quick mock of an empty state. And I used the comment here to back them up and say, hey, this is a great idea. Definitely back changing it. And the UX designer. So comments are also agreed. So the comments can be a great way to push ideas or suggest ideas in content as well, obviously, and design. Versions. So a lot of editing is about versions. I think it's a really good exercise. I think Yossi talked about it at the beginning, 60 versions. That's a lot of versions. But it's a good exercise to duplicate the screen and try a different approach. And versions show how a UX writer is thinking. I almost think that if we don't do versions, we're kind of not doing our job properly. In the end, you kind of it shows that you did one version that's very marketing, or one that's kind of like less, and one that's a bit more technical, and then you kind of get them together. Sometimes the versions are just for the writer and the editor, maybe not for the product manager and the UX designer, but I think getting there is the fun part. So like, how many versions should we write? There's no hard and fast rule. I personally think like between 3 and 5 is a good number. If you're doing like 8 or 9 versions, 10, you can sometimes get a bit lost in the woods. Like what what are we talking about here? So here's just like 3 very simple versions of a login screen, which we haven't finished yet. So summary, I couldn't find a good picture of a summary, so I just put summary picture. So the summary of the technique. So discuss and bounce ideas, use questions when editing, don't always look at the screen, refer to the style guide, the content patterns, look out for legacy content or the context, and work on versions. Try and get to a version, but get to the right version. And sometimes you can use a bit of version 3 with a bit of version 2, but mostly used version 1. Version 1 was quite good, but you might get a word out of version 3 or 4. The desired outcome of editing, I think is, so this is where we get into an area of being a mentor, where is to encourage and empower. I really think that it's a great, as writers, we often get a lot of negative feedback or just like requests to change things. It's also very important to give positive feedback, and sometimes you may love the overall writer's work, or the flow is great, but the 3 things that you didn't like, you need to change, they'll be the only 3 things that the writer will remember. So it's very important to kind of end or make it very clear that the work is good when it is good. And I think give ownership. The ultimate goal of an editor is not to edit. We don't want to edit eventually. After 6 months, a year, hopefully the writer can own their own work and make the final decision. And also, it's very important to not kind of force your edits or send the writer on a battle on issue that they don't believe in. It's got to come from the writer themselves. It's got to come from them, and they've got to buy into it and own it. And I think it goes back to the last session. I really like to add in value to the team. I think someone who owns the copy from the beginning, we call them chapters at Wix, which is before Figma, owns it from the kickoff right through to the very end, even localization. That's someone who has authority and can actually add value and ownership. Okay, I don't know how I'm doing for time. A quick word on AI, kind of connected to the topic. AI and UX. So AI, I think, is great at generating long form blogs and demo copy and essays, but UX writing, as we've seen, is a bit more than words, or it's a bit more than algorithm so far until now. It includes analytical thought, teamwork. We have to work with real people, and sometimes it's just logic or common sense, taking that crazy screen and making it simple for the user. Empathy with the users, kind of emotional intelligence, really thinking, what is the user thinking at this time? Sometimes it's something you can't put your finger on. It's just the look and feel of the words. Like sometimes just this doesn't look right. Let's try something else. And adaptation and thinking outside the box. So I called it authentic intelligence, not artificial intelligence. And I think something that AI can't do is be a mentor. So as I said, the other part, or empower somebody. So machines can write, they can produce fast, they can check for grammar. Machine learning is great, probably for word choice. Maybe I could question that. I think a human could probably do better word choice, and give advice and tips. But machines can't be a mentor, right? They can't share from their own personal experience, and if they did, it wouldn't be authentic. A machine could say, hey, great job, that was really good. It wouldn't be coming from an experienced writer who's suffered for 4 or 5 years in a team in the same job that you've done. So and they can't empathize, empower, encourage you to grow. So and I really think that it's fine, as we say, it's fine to make mistakes. Making mistakes is how we learn and improve in any walk of life, and especially in writing, UX writing. It's fine to make mistakes, and that's the best way to learn. So in a nutshell, editing we'd like to encourage and empower writers through the editing process. Discuss, it's a two-way conversation, asking, not telling. Invest time, do versions, arrive at a version, and teach writers to edit themselves, to own their own content. I'll end with a quote from Zadie Smith, another fiction writer, that the secret to editing your work is simple. You need to become its reader instead of its writer. And just, I know it's about fiction, but replace the word reader with user, and it's the secret to editing your work is simple. You need to become its user instead of its writer. I think it's a very simple sentence. It may sound very simple, but this is the essence of what we do as editors and UX writers, that we can be sometimes the only person in the room who's literally thinking as that user, because often the product team has been working on something for 6 months, sometimes longer, sometimes less, and sometimes it's hard to be the voice of the user, but that's our role. Thank you very much. I don't know if I was in overtime or undertime, but I want to say I know it's festival week for lots of people, different people. So it's Hag Sameach in Israel and Ramadan Kareem, happy Easter, and just have a good spring.
Thank you, Dan.
Happy spring.
Happy spring, everyone. Dan, yours talk really resonated with me. I sit on a team of editors at a higher education institute, and we currently don't have a one-to-one mentoring program like you recommend. And I've noticed that in our group of editors, we all emphasize different aspects of the writing. Could you give some insight on maybe how you can align if we were to break into a one-on-one? Like, how do you get your editors to be focusing on similar things?
You mean if you have different editors?
If you have different editors, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, we this is another thing. We train as editors as well, and that's something we're aligned on. So we have a Wix voice or Wix. Yeah, I think we need to go back to the style guide and align on what we're doing. But everybody does have their own way of editing, though. So that's also something to add. There's no one right way. It's like writing, right? There's no one right way. But we also train our mentors. We have like a mentor group, and I'm helping train them. And there it's almost like a support group where we're all kind of facing similar issues, although our writers are facing similar issues. And that's a great way to, I'm not sure align, Lizzie, is the right word. I like aligning in terms of content. Yeah, aligning in terms of style guide. But it's kind of more just like giving tips so that they can be a mentor or edit. So we kind of say that, like I said, asking questions instead of telling. That's the Wix way, and some other companies might have different ways, but we really think that asking questions opens up like a discussion with the writer, and that's a good way of editing. So yeah, I don't know if that answered your question, but yeah, kind of there's no concrete way to align all editors, but we can train men to be mentors, and we do have a way of doing it.
So almost like a community of practice for the editors as well, is what it sounds like. Yeah,
we have a little community of about 10 mentors, editors. They're interchangeable, so we call them mentors, but they're really editors. And we meet every month.
Every month? Okay.
Yeah, every month. And I think it's good to keep in touch because not everybody is, what's the word? Not everybody likes being edited. And it's and the product managers also kind of like, hey, what's this? Why is this person coming and editing my product? So it can be challenging.
Yeah. Ramona, are you still here?
Yes, I am.
Ramona, did you want to ask your question to Dan?
Sure. So I've been experimenting with different ways of interacting with the designers as well as the devs and product owners. So I started using a copy doc to go through a complete screen from like top to bottom, from the breadcrumbs all the way down to the call to action, everything in its own namespace and the original copy that was on the screen, because I tell the designers to go ahead and put proto copy in, because often they are working directly with the development team and they should know basically what it should say. And then I come in and I review it, edit it. So I have a column for their current or original copy, then my edit, and then a space for just an exploration, another column. And it kind of gets convoluted because their eyes glaze over when they look at a 100-page document and going like, what are we changing here? So we've been kind of experimenting for shorter projects. If it's only maybe a few screens, we've been editing right in the Figma file. They'll create me a branch of the file, and then I do my editing there, and then we kind of go back and forth. So I'm just trying to look for the best way. And I know there are some tools out there that I have yet to explore. Somebody mentioned Frontitude, and I know there's some other ones. So I'm just trying to really find that balance, a great tool for editing and approval, where you can capture those iterations of copy. Any advice or insight?
We just use Figma for editing. We used to use Google Slides for quick like on-screen edits and back and forth. I said it's a lot of back and forth. It can turn quickly into a very long comment thread. And as I said, I think just like verbal, you need knowing when to do verbal editing, like Zoom, and good old kind of like writing it down, like just giving them like, these are things you need to change, go back and do it. But the iterations, I think we use Figma, and we have exactly what you said. We have like a content drafts page in the Figma file. And some writers have their own like separate Figma file, because Figmas can get huge. The Figma files can get huge, can't they? Very heavy. So that's another way. Just have your own Figma file for the content iterations. I did it recently. I just created my own file for content drafts, and because I realized I was causing too much noise on the main Figma file, like every other comment was me. So I did it somewhere else, so I didn't annoy people. And then you kind of own the file. So yeah, if your company's using Figma, then like, why not use Figma?
Well, one more caveat to that, we do have some regulations. We have to have like state approvals for content reading grade levels. So we have to send them like a Word document that has the copy in there and our proof of the reading grade level. So that's for member facing content. So there is another element to that too, for having to send out a reading grade level file, or we Fleisch Kincaid.
It's educational content, is it? Educational.
Well, it's for the application. So if something changed, whenever we're writing content for members, it's in healthcare, for providers and other, there's some reading grade levels, but mostly for like members, we have to, in content that's going out to multiple states, we have to write at a 4th grade reading level. So that copy has to be sent in to the state. And with the proof of the reading grade level, it just says, hey, this is 4.9 Fleisch Kincaid. So having to go through all that copy in Figma and then pull it out to send it to like a Word document, it's like a challenge for all those different screens.
I don't know. Anybody else know tools that can help take content out of Figma into a doc?
I mean, from Figma, that's the thing. You can copy and paste as a PNG or JPEG for Figma, but that's as good as it gets, as far as I'm aware.
Any other questions about that?
I think that's everything. Dan, specific Figma plugin questions. I think Ditto would be one for exporting.
Yeah.
All right, Dan, thank you so much for your wisdom and insight when it comes to the world of editing.
Thank you.